The drums echoed through the night. On Tuluwat Island, just off the coast of Eureka, California, the Wiyot people were gathered for their world renewal ceremony. It was a sacred tradition, meant to restore balance to the earth. Fires burned low. Songs carried softly over the water. Children slept near the women. The men had left earlier that evening, rowing across to the mainland to gather supplies for the final day of the ritual. The island was quiet, peaceful, vulnerable. Just before dawn, shadows moved through the tide pools. Boots stepped onto wet sand. Axes were raised. And the killing began. What followed was not a battle, it was an execution. White settlers, armed with hatchets, clubs, and knives, slipped into the sleeping encampment. There were no warnings, no shots fired, just the dull thud of wood and the tearing sound of steel. Women were struck in their blankets. Children were lifted and thrown. Infants were silenced mid-cry. One survivor later recalled watching a man casually clean his blade on the grass before moving to the next cradle. It didn't last long. By sunrise, the beach was quiet again. The men returned to find their families in pieces. Blood pooled in the sand. Ceremonial regalia torn and scattered. Estimates vary, but between 80 and 200, Wiyot were murdered that morning. Most were women and children. Not a single settler was harmed. News of the massacre reached the mainland quickly, and the reaction was split. Some newspapers condemned it, others justified it. Local authorities did nothing. No one was arrested. No one was tried. The perpetrators didn't hide, they boasted. They claimed the Wiyot were a threat, that they were cleaning up the region, that it was necessary. But the truth was simpler. The settlers wanted the land. Tuluwat Island held strategic value, and the Wiyot, peaceful and unarmed, stood in the way. They had tried to adapt, to coexist. They had signed treaties, tended crops, even worked with local merchants. But in the end, none of that mattered. A few days later, coordinated attacks were launched on other Wiyot villages along the coast. More were killed. The tribe, once numbering in the hundreds, was left shattered, scattered survivors hiding in the forests or taken in by neighboring nations. The land was taken. The drums went silent. Years passed. The massacre faded from public memory. Tuluwat Island was turned into a shipyard, then a landfill. The blood-soaked soil was buried under industry. The Wiyot were nearly erased, not just in numbers but in story. But they didn't disappear. The survivors held on. They passed down the truth. They fought for recognition. For decades, they pushed to reclaim their ancestral island. And in 2004, over a century after the massacre, part of Tuluwat was returned to the Wiyot people, not by force, not through the courts, but by an act of trust. The city of Eureka voluntarily gave it back. It wasn't justice, but it was a beginning. Today, the ceremony lives on. The world renewal dance has returned. The fires are lit once more, and while the ghosts of 1860 still linger in the tide, they are no longer alone. The island breathes again, with memory, with mourning, with survival. In the dark silence before dawn, they came with axes, but the Wiyot endured. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.